Zone Fighter, or Meteor Human Zone as it's known in Japan, is one of Toho's stranger but significant dives into the world of superhero television. This tokusatsu sci-fi series aired on Nippon Television from April to September 1973, delivering 26 episodes of alien invasions, giant monster battles, and more than a few questionable fashion choices. Now, the early 1970s marked a very big shift in how Japanese monster movies operated. Television was on the rise. It was cheaper, easier, and right there in your living room. Why go to the theater when you could watch rubber-suited heroes and monsters right from your couch? Toho felt this shift really hard, especially after the death of special effects legend Eiji Tsuburaya in 1970. By 1971, Toho had restructured into multiple subsidiaries, one of which was Toho Eizo, tasked with television production. Leading the charge was Godzilla's own producer Tomoyuki Tanaka. He pulled together a new effects team with Teruyoshi Nakano, one of Tsuburaya's proteges, stepping up to guide Toho special effects into the TV era. Meanwhile, Japan was deep in the Henshin boom, where transforming heroes were all the rage. Toei's Masked Rider, or Kamen Rider, had taken off, and Toho wasn't about to miss out. Enter Zone Fighter, Toho's bid to grab the superhero spotlight. It was a very calculated move to snag viewers hooked on action-packed, transformation-heavy stories. And the show ran on a very modest budget of around 500 million yen. This wasn't a lot of money, so they needed to do a lot of creative stretching, from simpler effects to scaled-down sets. Still, Toho roped in some big names. Director Jun Fukuda as well as Ishiro Honda, both veterans of Toho's kaiju films, took the helm. Special effects were handled by Nakano and Koichi Kawakita, names that would later be synonymous with Toho's monster legacy. Even with the limited funds, they aimed to deliver something that was extremely memorable. And here's the kicker. Zone Fighter featured guest spots from Toho's biggest kaiju, Godzilla, King Ghidorah, and Gigan. Mind you, this crossover was less about telling a really creative story and more about ensuring higher ratings by including pre-existing well-known characters. It was a business decision first and foremost. Whether you want to take that from a more cynical perspective is entirely up to you, but objectively, this decision secured a legacy for Zone Fighter, a show that would otherwise be extremely obscure and forgotten years after the fact. Later supplemental material from Toho even confirmed that Zone Fighter is part of the Showa-era Godzilla continuity, fitting snugly between Godzilla vs. Megalon and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. I don't normally care for supplemental materials when talking about movies or TV shows, because these should be standalone stories, but I do think that's pretty cool, and honestly, that's why this odd little show earns a spot in my Godzilla retrospective series. It's not a Godzilla series by name, but if Godzilla's stomping through a few episodes, it's worth a deeper look. Since this is the first episodic TV show I'm covering in this overarching Godzilla retrospective series, I won't do an episode-by-episode breakdown. Otherwise, this video will be an hour long, and frankly, I don't have the willpower to make this video that long. It does not deserve to be that long. The episodes are incredibly repetitive in terms of plot structure and formula. It's basic monster of the week type stuff. Monster shows up, Zone Fighter fights the monster, the good guys win, the bad guys lose, rinse and repeat. So I'm going to do a blanket overview of the series as a whole. You're not going to get my episode by episode breakdown like I did with Neon Genesis Evangelion. If you're disappointed by that, then I don't know what to tell you, because a lot of the review would just be me going like, yeah, this episode was fine. So without wasting any more time, this is Zone Fighter. At the core of Zone Fighter's story is the Zone family. They're extraterrestrial refugees from the doomed planet Peaceland. Very subtle. After their homeworld is annihilated by the Garoga army, they flee to Earth and take on human identities as the Sakimori family. But unlike the usual lone hero setup in most tokusatsu series, Zone Fighter leans into a full family dynamic. Parents, 3 kids, and a grandpa. But the Sakimori siblings are the main event. Hikaru transforms into the titular Zone Fighter, ready to punch and missile blast his way through any problem. His sister Hotaru becomes Zone Angel, handling the more agile side of combat. while their younger brother, Akira, transforms into Zone Jr., the energetic kid's sidekick archetype. Transformations happen with the command Hikaru can even level up with Zone Double Fight, allowing him to grow to giant size and take on the Garoga's towering terror beasts. Speaking of villains, the Garoga army fills that role with gusto. They're a ruthless alien force responsible for Peaceland's destruction, and now they have their sights set on Earth. Leading the charge is Gold Garoga, aka Baron Garoga, who looks every bit the classic evil overlord with his cape and booming voice. Their base of operations is a massive satellite in space, from which they launch their evil schemes and their terror beast missiles. These genetically engineered monsters are either launched to Earth or created when Garoga spies transform into giant forms. The terror beasts are the central threat of the show. They show up in every episode, and typically like to cause destruction, while Zone Fighter and his family have to take them down. It's a very simple setup. Here's where it gets interesting. Godzilla shows up as an occasional ally, summoned by the Zone family when Zone Fighter gets absolutely wrecked in battle. It's a fun, if slightly ridiculous, dynamic that mirrors Godzilla's evolving Showa-era image, less of a destroyer of worlds and more of a grumpy but reliable protector. It also kind of mirrors his relationship with Jet Jaguar that we see in Godzilla vs. Megalon, though that just has to do with Jet Jaguar just looking like your typical kind of Ultraman knockoff, and Zone Fighter very much fits into that realm of Ultraman knockoff. Godzilla develops an oddly wholesome relationship with Zone Fighter, which peaks in episode 21, when the Sakimori family builds him a literal Godzilla cave to crash in. In this show, the King of the Monsters is portrayed by Toru Kawai and Isao Zushi, with Zushi later suiting up in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and Kawai following in Terror of Mechagodzilla. But Godzilla isn't alone. There's King Ghidorah, the three-headed menace who drops in for episodes 5 and 6. Here, he's mind-controlled by the villainous Garoga. Ghidorah is one of the few monsters that Zone Fighter doesn't kill off, which feels like Toho's way of preserving his status for later films. After all, Destroy All Monsters already established his eventual fate, with that film being set in 1999, years after the events of Zone Fighter. Not to mention, these episodes mark the final appearance of Ghidorah's original Showa design. It's kind of like watching a rock star's last tour, except the rock star is old, fat, and completely washed, like Vince Neil. Still, Ghidorah here is taken seriously, which is pretty cool. His 2 episodes are great, and he really gets a chance to shine. Gigan shows up in episode 11, though he's lost his flight abilities and that iconic buzzsaw, but he gains a new skill, causing explosions with his hook hands as well as having parachutes for some reason. Gigan dukes it out with Godzilla, gets defeated, revives for round 2, and finally meets his end courtesy of Zone Fighter's Meteor Missile Might attack. It's brutal, but also definitive. This is the last appearance of Gigan, at least in the Showa era. In the Godzilla timeline, this is his canonical death. Kinda bizarre. Now, despite its crossover with the Godzilla franchise, Zone Fighter is rarely acknowledged in later films or media. None of the characters ever reappeared, and Toho has largely left it buried. Still, the show has maintained a niche following among tokusatsu and kaiju fans. As one of the few TV series that are officially tied to the Godzilla universe, it really stands as this fascinating relic in Toho's broader tokusatsu catalog. So, how well did it actually work? Honestly, it's kind of a mixed bag. The show completed its planned 26-episode run, but didn't go any further due to low ratings. The production faced typical TV challenges like tight budgets, grueling schedules, and a lack of enthusiasm from the key creative figures. For many, like director Jun Fukuda, it was just a director-for-hire gig. He wasn't really too enthused about it, he wasn't passionate about it, and that kind of shows. Fukuda didn't believe that television could do justice to kaiju storytelling, instead preferring the scale and spectacle of film over what was considered a lesser medium at the time. With a modest budget and weekly deadlines, corners were inevitably cut. That strain really shows in certain episodes. Zone Fighter aired in a primetime Monday slot, which signaled very high expectations from Toho, but it didn't land. Audience reception was very lukewarm. Some were into the novelty of Godzilla fighting alongside a TV superhero, others found the format to be very formulaic and transparently aimed at children, almost pandering. In the end, Zone Fighter sits in a very weird corner of the Godzilla universe. On one hand, it's a Showa-era curiosity with surprisingly good miniature work and some fun monster designs that honestly deserve more love. On the other hand, it's a very cheap TV show where Godzilla shows up often enough to goose the ratings, it's repetitive, it's very dull, and it's clearly not designed for modern-day binge-watching. And trust me, do not, under any circumstances, binge watch this thing. I tried. I really did. More than 2 episodes in one sitting, and I could feel my brain just melting in my skull. This piece took 2 months to finish because I had to pace myself or risk going full Jack Torrance. But to be fair, shows like this weren't meant to be consumed all at once. This is going to be a bizarre connection that feels like schizophrenic rambling at first, but let me cook here. It kind of reminds me of the show Twin Peaks: The Return, and how that series was made in a very specific way to counter binge watching. New episodes were aired on Showtime weekly, and that was the way that the creators intended on having the audience consume that specific show. Zone Fighter is kind of sort of the same way, but rather than being an 18-hour surreal feature-length series, it's a show that you'd catch on TV when it was airing, and that's it. That's not a knock on the show, by the way. Some series are bingeable, some aren't, and Zone Fighter isn't. But that doesn't mean it's bad. If you pick a random episode here and there, it can be a perfectly fun time. If I had to recommend a very specific episode, I'd say first check out the pilot episode, but then go watch episode 21, which is titled Invincible: Godzilla Rages. But looking back, Zone Fighter's legacy is completely wrapped up in its Godzilla connections. It even had 2 separate opening title sequences and ends with an unresolved finale, like a lot of Toho's 70s oddities. But it never got the chance to grow beyond that first season, which cements its place as a strange, short-lived entry in Godzilla history. And the worst part is, its ongoing obscurity is very much Toho's fault. Unlike Ultraman, which has been preserved and re-released for decades on DVD, Blu-ray, you name it, Zone Fighter never got a proper physical release in the West. You can find episodes on Internet Archive, other places I'm not going to mention, but it's kind of trapped in a weird limbo. It's too obscure to be celebrated, it's too important to be forgotten. I'm not even its biggest fan, but I would love to see it remastered and given a proper home video release someday. It might not be a masterpiece, it is not a masterpiece, but it's still a piece of Godzilla history. And with all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media. This is just a very small part of my ongoing Godzilla retrospective series. This is one of the shorter entries for sure. A lot of that has to do with me not wanting to be too redundant, since a lot of the episodes are kind of sort of the same thing over and over again. The goal of this series is to revisit every single Godzilla movie and TV show. I've talked about the majority of the MonsterVerse, and of course, every prior Showa-era movie. Stay tuned, because next I'll be going over Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, a movie that saw the debut of Godzilla's bionic cosmic counterpart, as well as King Caesar. I have a lot to say about that one, so keep an eye out. Massive thank you to our channel members. For $1.99 a month, you can become a channel member too. It's kind of like Patreon, but it's right here on YouTube. Every new video I post here on the channel is made available to channel members before it's released to the public, meaning you could have seen this video a day in advance, other videos in a week in advance, and even longer in other cases. On top of that, too, you get custom emojis in chat, exclusive members-only videos, behind-the-scenes update videos. I'm also working on a giant video where I go over all of my vinyl records that I have in my collection, and in the future, I'll be going over all the Blu-rays that I own as well. Since a lot of people have been asking about that, but it doesn't really seem like something that the vast majority of my viewers would want to see, so I'll make it a members-only video. Coolest of all those, you get to be credited as an executive producer in all of our original movies. Yes, you get to be in the credits of a real movie. Now, you don't have to if you don't want to, but it's an extra perk, and it's an extra way of supporting the channel while getting some cool things on the side. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.